The cargo shuttle touched down at Tessara's frontier trading post, kicking up red dust that settled slowly in the thin mountain air. David stepped off the ramp with his toolkit slung over one shoulder and surveyed the collection of mismatched buildings that served as the planet's main commerce hub. Aliens of a dozen species moved between the structures, conducting business with the casual efficiency of those who had done this 1,000 times before that a crystalline merchant approached him, its faceted body refracting the afternoon sunlight into rainbow patterns. "You are the human engineer? The one Crimson hired?" David nodded and adjusted his toolkit. "That would be me, David Chun. I was told she needs help with some cabin maintenance up in the mountains." The crystalline being made a sound like wind chimes laughing. "Maintenance? Is that what she told you? Friend, you have traveled across 3 star systems to patch a shed that barely qualifies as a structure. The dragon must be losing her wisdom in old age." 2 amphibious traders nearby joined the conversation, their wet skin glistening in the dry air. The larger one gestured with a webbed hand toward the mountain peaks visible in the distance. "We have been on this world for 6 cycles. Crimson's retreat is smaller than our storage units. Why would she need an engineer for that?" David shrugged. "A job is a job. She contacted my firm specifically and paid well for the consultation. If she wants professional work done, I am here to provide it." The crystalline merchant's laughter intensified. "Professional work on a dragon's vacation hovel. The galaxy has truly gone mad. Well, your ride is waiting at the Easter dock. Try not to waste too much of your expertise on hammering a few boards together." The flight to Crimson's mountain retreat took 2 hours in a rented hover transport. David spent the time reviewing the geological surveys of the region and studying atmospheric data he had downloaded before leaving the station. Something about the weather patterns felt wrong, though he could not immediately identify what bothered him. The numbers showed standard seasonal variations with nothing particularly dangerous flagged by local meteorology services. The cabin came into view as they crested the final ridge. David asked the pilot to circle once so he could assess the structure from all angles. It was indeed small by galactic standards, perhaps 8 meters on each side with a sloped roof and a single chimney. The construction used local stone for the foundation with timber walls and a metal roof that had seen better days. A small landing pad sat 50 meters away, just large enough for a dragon to set down comfortably. Crimson herself waited on that pad, her scales the deep red of cooling lava. She was massive, easily 40 meters from nose to tail, with wings that could blot out the sun when fully extended. As the transport landed, she folded those wings carefully and lowered her head to bring her eyes level with the hatch. David stepped out and extended his hand in greeting. "Crimson, I presume. I am David Chun from Unified Engineering Solutions. Your message said you needed structural consultation and possible reinforcement work." The dragon's voice rumbled like distant thunder. "I did. Thank you for coming such a distance, David Chun. I imagine the traders at the post gave you their opinions on this arrangement. They were amused by it, yes. They always are. Humans have a saying about judging books by their covers, do they not?" David smiled. "We do. Should I assume this cabin is more important than its size suggests?" Crimson gestured toward the structure with one massive claw. "I built it 70 years ago as a hibernation retreat. The isolation suits my needs during the cold season. However, I'm not an engineer. I am a dragon who assembled rocks and wood in a configuration that provides shelter. Whether that configuration is sound under stress, I cannot say." David set down his toolkit and pulled out his scanning equipment. "Let me take a look. Do you mind if I go inside?" "Please do. I will remain out here. The interior is not sized for my comfort." The cabin's inside was sparse but functional. A large alcove dominated one wall, clearly where Crimson rested in her smaller curled form during hibernation. Simple shelving held supplies and a few personal items. The walls were uninsulated, and David could see daylight through several gaps in the stonework. He ran his structural scanner over the support beams and foundation anchors, frowning at the readouts. When he emerged, Crimson watched him expectantly. "Your expression suggests problems. Nothing catastrophic for normal conditions," David said carefully. "But your foundation anchors are shallow. maybe a meter deep at most. The wall bracing is minimal, adequate for keeping the structure upright, but not for resisting lateral forces. Your roof is attached with basic fasteners that would fail under sustained high winds. For calm weather, this is fine. For anything more severe, you would have issues. What kind of issues? Structural failure. Possibly total collapse, depending on wind speed and duration. Crimson's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. The weather here is generally mild. Local services assure colonists that Tessara experiences only light storms, nothing compared to more volatile worlds. David pulled out his datapad and showed her the atmosphere charts he had been studying. These patterns bother me. I grew up on Earth, in a region that experienced hurricanes. We learned to read pressure systems and temperature gradients like other people read books. Something about your planet's current atmospheric behavior reminds me of the calm before dangerous storms back home. You think a storm is coming? I think your planet's weather monitoring is based on recent data. If you have been here 70 years, you have a longer perspective. Have you ever experienced severe weather in this location? The dragon was quiet for a long moment. Once, nearly 60 years ago, a storm that lasted 3 days and destroyed several settlements in the lowlands. But the meteorologist said that was an anomaly, a once-in-a-lifetime event. David nodded slowly. On Earth, we have a saying, hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. If you want this cabin to survive another 60-year anomaly, we need to do serious reinforcement work. If nothing happens, you have a stronger structure. If something does happen, you have a safe shelter. How long would such work take? With proper materials? About a week. Crimson studied him with ancient eyes. The traders will mock this even more thoroughly when they see you bringing construction supplies up the mountain for a small cabin. Let them laugh. I would rather be laughed at than be responsible for a structure failing when it matters most. The dragon's expression, difficult to read on such an alien face, seemed to show approval. Then let us begin. Order whatever you need. 3 days into the reinforcement project, David had transformed the area around the cabin into a proper construction site. Supply crates lined the landing pad, filled with deep anchor posts, cross-bracing materials, structural adhesives, and reinforced paneling. He worked methodically, starting with the foundation and building upward in layers that would distribute stress across the entire structure. The sound of an approaching transport interrupted his work on the eastern wall anchors. David straightened and wiped sweat from his forehead as the vehicle settled onto the landing pad. 6 aliens emerged, a mix of crystalline scholars and reptilian surveyors who had come to Tessara to study its geological formations. The lead crystalline, its body a deep blue that marked it as a senior researcher, approached with the confident stride of someone accustomed to being the smartest presence in any room. We heard rumors that a human was building fortifications in the mountains. I had to see this absurdity for myself. David returned to his work on the anchor post, using a power driver to secure it 3 meters into the bedrock. Just doing the job I was hired for, reinforcing the structure to proper safety standards. One of the reptilian surveyors circled the cabin, examining David's work with obvious amusement. Proper safety standards? For what? A planetary invasion? This is a seasonal retreat, not a military installation. It is a structure that someone values, David replied without looking up. That means it deserves to be built right. The blue crystalline researcher gestured at the piles of materials. Do you understand how much energy and resources you are wasting? The local weather monitoring confirms Tessara has remarkably stable atmospheric conditions. Light precipitation, gentle winds, moderate temperatures. This world is practically paradise compared to most frontier colonies. David finished securing the anchor post and stood, meeting the alien's faceted gaze directly. I read those reports. They are based on 73 years of data collection. What happens in year 74, or 80, or 100? We extrapolate from existing patterns. That is how science works, human. On Earth, we have hurricanes that can level entire cities, tornadoes that turn buildings into shrapnel, earthquakes that crack the ground open. We learned a long time ago that assuming nature will be kind is a good way to get people killed. The reptilian surveyor laughed, a hissing sound that carried condescension. Perhaps that is why humans over-engineer everything. You come from a death world and cannot imagine that other planets might be more forgiving. This is not Earth, David Chun. This is Tessara, a gentle world that requires no such paranoid preparations. Another crystalline scholar joined the conversation, examining the storm shutters David had fabricated. These reinforced panels must have cost a fortune to transport here. For what? To protect against weather that will never come? The dragon has survived for centuries without your primitive reinforcements. David picked up another anchor post and carried it to the next foundation point. Crimson survived by being able to fly away when needed. But this cabin matters to her, which means it matters to me. If I'm going to put my name on this work, it will be built to last. Built to last through what? The blue crystalline pressed. Show me in the atmospheric data where you see a threat. Show me evidence that justifies this expensive paranoia. David pulled out his datapad and brought up the pressure charts he had been monitoring. These gradients here and here, the way the high-pressure system is building over the Northern Ocean. The temperature differential between the equatorial zone and the polar regions. On Earth, patterns like this preceded major storm formations. The lead researcher examined the data and made a dismissive gesture. You are seeing patterns because you expect to see them. Confirmation bias is a known human failing. This pressure system is well within normal parameters for Tessara. Your Earth-based pattern recognition is meaningless on an alien world. Maybe, David conceded, or maybe 73 years is not enough time to understand a planet's full weather cycle. Either way, better safe than sorry. The reptilian surveyor shook his head. A waste of talent and resources. We are conducting real scientific work in the valley, mapping tectonic structures and analyzing mineral compositions. Meanwhile, you hammer away at a dragon's shed like some primitive craftsman. How are your shelters built? David asked suddenly. Standard galactic-rated temporary structures, rated for wind speeds up to 80 kilometers per hour and precipitation of 50 millimeters per hour. More than adequate for Tessara's documented conditions. David said nothing, but his expression must have conveyed his thoughts. The blue crystalline's voice took on an edge. You disapprove? These are certified structures, designed by civilizations far older than humanity. Perhaps you think your few thousand years of technological development makes you wiser than species who have traveled the stars for millions of years. I think different worlds teach different lessons, David replied carefully. Earth taught us to prepare for the worst because the worst happened regularly. If Tessara is as gentle as you say, then your shelters will be fine, and my work here is simply unnecessary insurance. Everyone wins. One of the other scholars gestured at the drainage channels David had dug around the cabin's perimeter. Even insurance has limits of reasonableness. You have excavated diversion trenches deep enough to handle flash flooding. Tessara has never recorded a flash flood in its entire colonial history. First time for everything, David muttered. The group spent another 20 minutes examining his work, each discovery of additional reinforcement provoking fresh mockery. The emergency supply cache he had installed in the cabin's cellar. The reinforced landing pad, designed to handle dragon impacts during high winds. The communication array with backup power systems, as they prepare to leave. The lead researcher offered what seemed intended as friendly advice. David Shun, you are clearly skilled at your craft, but you are allowing Earth-based trauma to cloud your judgment. Tessara is not your homeworld. It will not try to kill you. Perhaps when you finish this unnecessary project, you should consider psychological consultation to address these paranoid tendencies. David watched their transport lift off and disappear toward the valley. Crimson emerged from where she had been watching from a nearby cliff face. They think you are damaged, she observed. They think I am wasting time and resources on imaginary threats. Are you? David looked at his atmospheric monitors, watching the pressure readings continue their slow, steady build. Ask me again in a week. The dragon settled beside him, her massive form somehow conveying thoughtfulness. Why do you continue when faced with such ridicule? Because on Earth, the people who prepared were called paranoid right up until the moment the storm hit. Then they were called lifesavers. He picked up his tools and returned to work. I would rather be laughed at now than regretful later. 7 days after starting the project, David hammered the final structural bolt into place and stepped back to survey his work. The cabin looked different now, reinforced and solid in ways that were not immediately obvious but would matter when tested. The foundation anchors reached deep into bedrock. Cross-bracing ran through the walls like a skeleton of strength. Storm shutters sat ready to deploy at a moment's notice. Every joint had been sealed, every weak point reinforced, every possible failure mode addressed. Crimson inspected the completed work with careful attention. It looks the same, yet completely different. Good reinforcement should not be obvious, David replied. If I did my job right, the strength is built into the structure itself, not just bolted onto the surface. The dragon tested one of the shutters, surprised by how easily it moved despite its weight. You have thought of everything. I tried to. Emergency supplies in the cellar, backup power for the communication system, drainage to prevent flooding, anchors to prevent the whole structure from shifting even if the ground moves. He checked his atmospheric monitors and frowned. Just in time, too. The storm. David showed her the latest readings. The pressure system I have been watching is accelerating. Temperature differential is increasing. Wind patterns are shifting. Every indicator points to major weather formation within the next 48 hours. The local weather service still reports only mild rain expected. They're looking at surface conditions and short-term models. I'm looking at the bigger patterns, the kind that develop slowly and then hit hard. You check the time. I should send a warning to the trading post. At least give them a chance to prepare. The message David sent was polite but direct. He outlined the atmospheric indicators he had been tracking and strongly recommended that everyone in the valley reinforce their shelters or evacuate to higher ground. The response came back within an hour, forwarded by the blue crystalline researcher he had met days earlier. We appreciate your concern, but our meteorological systems show no indication of dangerous weather. Please do not spread panic based on unscientific fear responses. Tessara is a stable world. Your Earth-based trauma is not applicable here. David read the message twice and then deleted it. I tried. They will not listen. Crimson asked. They think I am letting fear override logic. Maybe they are right. Maybe this planet really is different and my instincts are wrong. But you do not believe that. No, I have seen this pattern before. The calm that feels wrong. The pressure building where it should not. The way the air tastes different. He looked at the darkening sky. Something is coming. 20 hours later, the first signs became impossible to ignore. The temperature dropped 15 degrees in 2 hours. The wind, normally a gentle breeze in the mountains, began to gust unpredictably. Cloud formations appeared on the horizon that did not match any of Tessara's documented weather patterns. David stood outside the cabin and watched the sky transform. Great towers of clouds built upward, their tops reaching heights that seemed impossible. Lightning flickered within them. Not the brief sparks of normal storms, but sustained charges that turned entire cloud banks white with energy. Crimson joined him, her ancient eyes studying the approaching system. I remember this. From 60 years ago, the storm that destroyed the lowland settlements. You were going to fly to your main den, David reminded her. You should go now, while you still can. This is going to get bad. The dragon was quiet for a long moment, watching the lightning dance across the sky. No, I will stay. If this cabin is as strong as you built it to be, then I want to witness that strength. Down in the valley, the research teams were beginning to notice the change. David's communication array picked up increasing chatter as aliens checked their instruments and compared readings. Confusion dominated the conversations. Nothing in their models predicted this. Nothing in Tessara's documented history suggested such rapid weather development was possible. The wind speed increased steadily. 50 kilometers per hour, 70, 90. The local weather service finally issued a storm warning, but it was cautious and understated. Severe weather possible. Seek appropriate shelter. Nothing that conveyed the true scope of what was developing. David deployed the storm shutters and secured everything that could become a projectile. He brought all his tools inside and double-checked the emergency supplies. Water, preserved food, medical kit, backup batteries for the communication system. Everything was ready. The wind hit 120 kilometers per hour and kept climbing. The crystalline researchers' transport tried to return to orbit, but was forced back by the turbulence. Their panicked transmissions filled the emergency channels. Their standard shelters were shaking. They had not prepared for this. They did not know what to do. Crimson listened to the transmissions with growing concern. They are in danger. They are in those valley shelters rated for 80 kilometers per hour maximum, David confirmed. And the wind is approaching 150 and still building. Can we help them? David looked at the dragon, then at the storm, then back at the dragon. You want to fly rescue missions in this? I am a dragon. I have flown through worse. Not with wind shear like this. Not with visibility dropping to zero. You would be risking your life for people who mocked both of us. Crimson's eyes met his. Is that not what humans do? Risk themselves for others, even those who do not deserve it. David could not argue with that. If you're serious about this, then we need a plan. You cannot search blindly in zero visibility. You need guidance, a beacon to return to. The cabin. Yes, I can set up high-intensity lights and keep the communication array running. You fly out, grab whoever you can carry, and follow the beacon back. We use this place as a safe point. The cabin will hold. David looked at his reinforced structure, built to withstand forces that everyone else said would never come. It will hold. I made sure of it. The wind reached 170 kilometers per hour. The first of the valley shelters collapsed, its frame crumpling like paper. Screams filled the emergency channels. The storm had arrived in full force, and Tessara was learning what it meant when a planet decided to show its teeth. Crimson spread her wings. Guide me home, David Shun. No matter what happens out there, you keep that beacon running. I will. The dragon launched into the maelstrom, her massive form disappearing almost instantly into the screaming wind and driving rain. David ran back inside and activated every light the cabin had, turning the small structure into a blazing point of reference in the darkness. Then he opened the emergency channel and began coordinating the rescue. The storm had come. Now they would see who had prepared correctly. Crimson returned from her first flight with 3 crystalline researchers clinging to her back, their faceted bodies reflecting the cabin's beacon lights in fractured rainbows. She landed hard on the reinforced pad, her claws digging into the surface for purchase against wind that tried to throw even her massive bulk sideways. David ran out to help the aliens down, guiding them through the screaming storm to the cabin's entrance. The blue crystalline researcher who had mocked David's work collapsed inside, its body structure visibly cracked from impact with debris. The shelters, they just fell apart. The wind came from 3 directions at once, and they folded like cheap fabric. David wrapped thermal blankets around all 3 survivors and checked them for injuries. How many others are down there? 18 in the main research camp. 7 at the geological survey site to the east. All the structures are failing or already gone. Crimson shook water from her scales, the cabin walls taking the spray without complaint. I can make another run. Where's the survey site? David pulled up the terrain maps on his datapad. 3 kilometers northeast, down in the canyon. But Crimson, the wind is over 200 now. The visibility is almost 0. How are you even navigating? By memory and instinct. I have flown these mountains for 70 years. I know every cliff face and valley. Not in conditions like this, you do not. The wind shear alone could throw you into a rock face. The dragon met his eyes steadily. Then you'll guide me. Your instruments can see what my eyes cannot. They worked out a system. David would track Crimson's position using the communication array sensors and provide constant updates on wind direction, obstacles, and safe flight paths. The cabin would remain lit like a lighthouse, giving her a fixed point to navigate toward. It was dangerous and inefficient, but it was the only chance the stranded aliens had. Over the next 6 hours, Crimson made 11 flights into the storm. Each time she returned, she carried more survivors. Reptilian surveyors with broken limbs. Amphibious traders whose breathing membranes were damaged by the violent air pressure changes. More crystalline researchers, some cracked so badly they might never fully heal. Even the transport pilots who had thought they could ride out the storm in their grounded vehicles, only to watch those vehicles get picked up and thrown like toys. The cabin filled beyond capacity. Aliens who had once mocked its small size now pressed together in grateful proximity, sharing warmth and space. David moved constantly between them, providing first aid, distributing emergency rations, offering what comfort he could. The structure around them groaned under the assault but held firm, but a young reptilian surveyor watched David work and finally spoke up. "You knew. You tried to warn us, and we laughed at you." David did not look up from bandaging an amphibious trader's injured arm. "I hoped I was wrong. Being right about this brings me no joy. Why did you prepare so thoroughly? You could not have known for certain that a storm like this was coming. On Earth, we have a saying, it is better to have something and not need it than to need something and not have it. I saw warning signs in the data, and I acted on them. That is all." One of the crystalline researchers, its voice weak from its injuries, added its thoughts. "We dismissed your concerns as primitive fear responses. We believed our advanced meteorological systems were superior to human intuition." "Your systems are advanced," David replied, "but they're based on limited data. 73 years is nothing in planetary timescales. Earth taught us to respect what we do not know about a world, because nature always has surprises waiting." Crimson returned from her 12th flight, carrying the last 4 survivors from the geological survey site. She was clearly exhausted, her movements slower and her landing less controlled. David helped the new arrivals inside and then checked on the dragon. "That is everyone accounted for," he reported. 27 total, all alive. Some injuries, but nothing immediately life-threatening. Crimson lowered herself to the landing pad, too tired to seek better shelter. "The valley is destroyed. Every structure is gone. The trading post collapsed completely. The people, those who could reach transport, got off-world before the worst hit. Those who could not are here." She looked at the small cabin, blazing with light against the darkness. "Your structure holds. It was built to hold. They mocked you for building it this way." David smiled tiredly. "They did, and now is saving their lives. That is how it works sometimes. The paranoid human who over-engineers everything becomes the only reason anyone survives." Inside the cabin, the blue crystalline researcher pulled itself closer to where David sat monitoring the storm's progress. "I owe you an apology. Several apologies, actually, for dismissing your warnings, for insulting your work, for assuming human caution was simply trauma rather than wisdom. Apology accepted. Right now, let us focus on getting through this storm. We can discuss lessons learned when everyone is safe." The storm continued for another 38 hours. Outside, the wind exceeded 250 kilometers per hour at its peak, with gusts that registered even higher. Rain fell in sheets so thick that visibility dropped to less than a meter. Lightning struck the mountain repeatedly, the thunder so constant it became a single sustained roar. Inside the reinforced cabin, 27 aliens and 1 human waited it out. They shared stories to pass the time. David explained Earth's hostile weather, the hurricanes and tornadoes and blizzards that had shaped human engineering philosophy. The aliens shared tales of their own worlds, most of which were far gentler than Earth or Tessara at its worst. The young reptilian surveyor asked the question many were thinking. "Why do you build for disaster when most days are peaceful? Does that not create unnecessary expense and effort?" David considered his answer carefully. "Because the peaceful days do not test your preparation. Only the disasters do. And on those days, the difference between adequate and excellent preparation is measured in lives saved or lost. To humans, that makes the extra effort worthwhile every single time." Another crystalline researcher, one whose body had been severely damaged by flying debris before rescue, spoke quietly. "Your species builds as though nature is actively hostile. That is because on Earth, nature is actively hostile. We learn to build for the worst case and be grateful when it does not arrive. Better to have a fortress and need a house than to have a house and need a fortress." The storm finally broke on the 3rd day. The wind dropped suddenly from lethal to merely dangerous. The rain eased to a steady fall. Visibility improved enough to see the devastation in the valley below. Where the trading post had stood, only scattered debris remained. The research camps were completely gone, their locations marked only by scattered equipment and structural fragments. But on the mountain, the small cabin stood untouched. Its lights still blazed. Its walls still held. Inside, 28 souls had survived what should have killed them all, protected by one human's refusal to accept that good enough was actually good enough. The rescue ships arrived 36 hours after the storm passed, their sleek forms descending through clearing skies toward what remained of the valley settlement. David stood outside the cabin with Crimson and watched the vessels circle the devastation below, their search patterns methodical. An increasingly confused Point 1 ship broke formation and climbed toward the mountain. Its communication system crackled to life. "This is Rescue Vessel Meridian Dawn to any survivors in the northern mountain region. We are detecting a power signature and multiple life signs at coordinates 774 by 321. Please respond." David activated his transmitter. "Meridian Dawn, this is David Shun. We have 28 survivors at this location, including injured who will need medical attention. The structure here is stable and we have adequate supplies, so there is no immediate emergency." A long pause followed. "Did you say 28 survivors? At a single location? Please confirm." "Confirmed. 27 rescued from the valley, plus myself. The cabin here served as an emergency shelter during the storm." Another pause, longer this time. "We are reading the valley as a total loss. All structures destroyed. How did anyone survive?" David looked at the reinforced cabin behind him. Good preparation and a dragon willing to risk her life making rescue flights. The Meridian Dawn landed carefully on Crimson's pad, its crew emerging with medical equipment and stunned expressions. The team leader, a tall insectoid with compound eyes that reflected in multiple colors, stared at the cabin as though unable to process what it was seeing. This structure survived winds that we measured at over 260 kilometers per hour. That is impossible for a building this size using standard frontier construction. "It is not standard construction," David explained. "I reinforced it specifically to handle extreme weather events." The insectoid's antennae twitched rapidly, a sign of confusion in its species. "But why?" The planetary surveys indicated Tessara was a low-risk world. Crimson answered before David could. The surveys were based on limited data. 73 years of observation on a planet that experiences major storm cycles every 60 to 80 years. The human recognized patterns that local meteorology missed. As the medical team began treating the injured survivors, more rescue ships arrived. News of the impossible survival spread quickly through the emergency response network. Engineers from 3 different species came to examine the cabin's construction, scanning every joint and anchor point with increasing amazement. A senior structural analyst, crystalline like several of the survivors, ran its scanning equipment over the foundation anchors for the 5th time. These go down 3 meters into solid bedrock. The cross-bracing distributes stress across the entire frame. The shutters are reinforced to handle sustained impacts. This is not frontier construction. This is military-grade disaster engineering. "This is human standard construction," David corrected. "Or at least Earth standard. We build like this because we have to." The analyst looked at him with something approaching awe. "Your homeworld must be horrific if this level of preparation is considered normal." Earth has its challenges, but they taught us valuable lessons about respecting nature and preparing for its extremes. The investigation into Tessara's weather patterns began immediately. Atmospheric scientists arrived with deep scanning equipment and began pulling data from planetary core samples, ice formations, and geological records. What they discovered sent ripples through the galactic meteorological community. Tessara experienced major storm events in roughly 60 to 75-year cycles, triggered by specific alignments of its 3 moons and their gravitational effects on oceanic temperature patterns. The current colonial presence had arrived during a calm period and established their weather monitoring during what was essentially the planetary equivalent of a gentle summer. They had assumed that summer was the planet's normal state, The blue crystalline researcher, its body now wrapped in repair webbing, presented the findings to the assembled survivors. We built an entire understanding of this world based on a peaceful anomaly. We dismissed warnings about potential dangers because they contradicted our limited data. The humans saw patterns we missed because his species has experience with planetary deception. One of the reptilian surveyors, her arm in a cast from injuries sustained during the storm, raised a question that many were considering. What happens now? If Tessara has cycles like this, can we even maintain a colony here? David had been thinking about that exact question. You can, but you need to build differently. Stop using temporary structures rated for gentle weather. Start using permanent construction designed for the worst this planet can throw at you. Reinforce everything. Add emergency shelters. Create proper warning systems that look at long-term patterns, not just short-term conditions. The senior structural analyst nodded agreement. We need to completely revise our building standards for frontier colonies. Your cabin should be the template, not the exception. It does not have to be this exact design, David said, but the principles behind it should be standard. Deep foundations, brasing, storm protection, emergency supplies. Build as though disaster is coming, because eventually it will. Over the following weeks, the survivor's story spread across the galactic network. The small cabin that survived the unsurvivable. The human engineer who prepared for a storm nobody believed would come. The dragon who risked everything to save those who had mocked them both. It became a case study in engineering schools and meteorology programs across dozens of worlds. David received hundreds of contract offers from colonies wanting him to review their infrastructure. Corporate entities offered massive payments for consulting work. Universities wanted him to teach courses on disaster preparation. He declined most of them. Why turn down such lucrative opportunities? Crimson asked as they sat outside the cabin, watching the valley below transform under reconstruction. Because I prefer building to talking about building. And because this world still needs help getting its infrastructure right. The new trading post was rising in the valley, constructed to David's specifications. Deep foundations reached into bedrock. Reinforced frames could handle winds far beyond what the storm had produced. Emergency shelters dotted the landscape at regular intervals. The difference between the new construction and the destroyed settlement was striking. The young reptilian surveyor, fully healed now, worked alongside David on one of the shelter projects. My people want me to return home and share what I learned here about proper preparation and respecting planetary environments. Will you go? Eventually. But first, I want to finish helping rebuild this settlement correctly. I was one of those who mocked your work. The least I can do is help prove that your methods work. David smiled and handed her a structural scanner. Then let us make sure these shelters can handle whatever Tessara decides to throw at them next. The blue crystalline researcher approached with a delegation of scientists. David Chun, we have completed our analysis of Tessara's storm cycles. With proper preparation and construction standards, this world can sustain a permanent colony. We are establishing new guidelines based largely on your cabin's design principles. We wanted to ask your permission to name these standards after you. David considered that for a moment. Name them after Earth, not me. I just applied lessons my home world taught humanity over thousands of years. If these standards help keep people safe, then that is what matters. The delegation nodded acceptance. The Earth standard for frontier construction. It has a good sound to it. Crimson watched the valley's reconstruction from her favorite perch. They learned their lesson well. They will not dismiss human caution again. Some will, David replied. There are always people who think disaster cannot happen to them. But enough learned. That makes the mockery worthwhile. The dragon's expression conveyed amusement. You were called paranoid, traumatized, and wasteful. Now you're called a hero and a visionary. How does that transformation feel? Like validation for every human who was ever mocked for being too careful, too prepared, too cautious. We build the way we build because we have seen what happens when you do not. He looked at his cabin, still standing strong despite everything the planet had thrown at it. Let them laugh. As long as structures like this keep people alive when it matters most, I can live with being the paranoid human who over-engineers everything. 6 months after the storm, The transformed valley settlement hummed with activity that would have been impossible in the destroyed trading post. Every structure now bore the marks of Earth standard construction. Reinforced frames, deep foundations, emergency systems built into the basic design rather than added as afterthoughts. The changes were not just cosmetic. They represented a fundamental shift in how the galactic community approached frontier colonization. David walked through the new market district with Crimson, observing the work crews putting final touches on a community shelter large enough to house 300 people. The crystalline supervisor spotted them and hurried over, its repaired body showing permanent fracture lines from the storm. David Chun, perfect timing. We wanted your approval on the drainage system before we seal the foundation. They spent an hour reviewing the construction, David pointing out minor adjustments that would improve water flow during heavy rain. The supervisor took notes eagerly, no longer dismissive of human caution, but grateful for expertise earned through harsh experience. When they finished, the supervisor hesitated before speaking again. I wanted to thank you properly, not just for saving my life during the storm, but for being patient with my arrogance beforehand. I called you paranoid and traumatized when you were simply being competent. You were working with the information you had, David replied. Limited data led to limited conclusions. There's no shame in that, only in refusing to update your understanding when new information arrives. Still, I should have listened. We all should have. After the supervisor left, Crimson and David continued their walk toward the mountain path. The dragon had resumed her normal routine, spending warm months in the valley and preparing for hibernation season in her cabin. But something had changed in how others perceived both of them. Young aliens now approached David regularly, asking questions about Earth and its hostile nature. How did humans survive on a world that produced hurricanes, earthquakes, and tornadoes? What lessons had humanity learned that could apply to other frontier worlds? The curiosity was genuine, born from seeing firsthand how human preparation methods saved lives that a group of students from the new Colonial Academy waited along the path, clearly hoping to intercept them. Their teacher, an elderly amphibious scholar, bowed respectfully as David approached. Forgive the ambush, Engineer Chun. My students are studying planetary adaptation and specifically requested the opportunity to ask you questions. David smiled. I have time. What would you like to know? A young crystalline student spoke first, its voice carrying the uncertainty of youth. Why do humans build as though every day might bring disaster? Does that not create a fearful society? It creates a prepared society, David corrected gently. We do not live in fear of storms because we have shelters built to withstand them. We do not panic during earthquakes because our structures are designed to flex and absorb the shaking. Preparation removes fear by removing helplessness. Another student, reptilian and already showing the sharp analytical mind of its species, asked a deeper question. But how do you know where to draw the line? You could spend infinite resources preparing for increasingly unlikely scenarios. How do humans decide what level of preparation is appropriate? David considered that carefully. We look at the worst documented case and prepare for something 10% worse than that. If the strongest recorded hurricane had winds of 300 kilometers per hour, we build for 330. If the largest earthquake measured 8.5, we design for 9. We assume nature will always surprise us and build in margins for those surprises. The teacher nodded thoughtfully. That philosophy explains much about human engineering. You do not build for expected conditions, but for unexpected extremes. Exactly, because the expected conditions are not what kill people. The students asked more questions, their curiosity endless. David answered each one, drawing from decades of Earth knowledge and recent Tessara experience. Crimson watched the exchange with quiet satisfaction, occasionally adding her own observations about how human methods had proven superior to galactic standard practices in real-world testing. When the students finally left, satisfied and inspired, David and Crimson continued up the mountain path. The cabin came into view, exactly as David had left it except for one addition. The Colonial Authority had placed a small plaque beside the entrance, marking the structure as a protected historical site. They want to preserve it as an educational example. Crimson explained. Future engineers will study how it was built and why it succeeded where others failed. David read the plaque's inscription. The cabin that survived. Built by human engineer David Chun using Earth's standard methods. Proof that proper preparation is never wasted effort. He shook his head with amusement. I just did my job. You did far more than your job. You challenged an entire civilization's assumptions about acceptable risk and adequate preparation. They settled outside the cabin, looking down at the rebuilt valley. The sun was setting, painting the new structures in warm colors that made them look almost welcoming despite their fortress-like strength. I received another message from the Colonial Engineering Board, David said. They want to establish Earth's standard as the mandatory minimum for all frontier construction across this sector. Not just recommended, but required by law. Will you accept the consulting position they offered? I am considering it. Training others to build properly could save thousands of lives across dozens of worlds. He paused. But I would miss this place. Miss working with my hands instead of just reviewing other people's work. Crimson was quiet for a moment. You changed this world, David Chun. Not just the physical structures, but how people think about preparation and safety. That is a rare gift. Earth changed this world. I was just the messenger. Earth gave you the knowledge. You chose to apply it even when mocked, even when dismissed, even when called paranoid and wasteful. That choice was yours alone. Down in the valley, the emergency warning system activated for its daily test. The sound echoed through the mountains, a reminder that Tessara's inhabitants now took potential disasters seriously. Shelters were marked clearly. Evacuation routes were established. Emergency supplies were stockpiled at regular intervals. The colony had transformed from complacent to cautious, from reactive to proactive. A transport landed at the valley port, carrying new colonists arriving to join the settlement. Unlike previous arrivals, these newcomers would receive mandatory training in emergency procedures. They would learn to read weather patterns and respect planetary warning signs. They would understand that Tessara's beauty came with periodic fury, and only preparation allowed civilization to coexist with natural extremes. What will you tell them? Crimson asked. The engineering board. Will you accept their offer? David thought about the cabin behind him, built with his own hands to standards that saved 28 lives. He thought about the rebuilt valley, every structure now incorporating lessons learned through near disaster. He thought about other frontier worlds, other colonies built with inadequate preparation, other disasters waiting to happen. I will accept on one condition. I do not just teach theory. I want to go to these frontier worlds and build demonstration structures, like this cabin. Show colonists firsthand what proper preparation looks like. They will call you paranoid on those worlds too. Probably. Right up until the disaster hits and my paranoid over-engineering saves lives. He smiled. I can live with that pattern. Better to be mocked and effective than praised and useless. Crimson spread her wings, testing them in the evening air. Then I suppose this is goodbye for now. You have worlds to save with your paranoid human ways. Not goodbye. This cabin is still your hibernation retreat. I will be back regularly to maintain it and make sure it stays ready for the next storm. There will be another storm. There's always another storm. On Tessara, on Earth, on every frontier world in the galaxy. Nature does not stop testing us just because we survived once. David stood and placed his hand on the cabin's reinforced wall. But if we build right, if we prepare properly, if we respect what we do not know about a world, then we can survive whatever comes. That is the lesson Earth taught humanity. That is the lesson Tessara can teach the galaxy. The dragon launched into the evening sky, her massive form silhouetted against the setting sun. David watched her go, then turned back to the cabin. Tomorrow he would begin his new role, traveling to frontier worlds and teaching the lessons of proper preparation. He would face mockery and dismissal, skepticism and resistance, but he would also save lives. Because somewhere out there, another storm was building. Another disaster waited patiently for complacent civilizations. And when it arrived, the difference between survival and catastrophe would be measured in the quality of preparation done today. David Shun, the paranoid human who over-engineered a dragon's cabin, would make sure as many people as possible were ready when their storm came. Because on Earth, humanity had learned a simple truth that the galaxy was only beginning to understand. Hope for the best. Prepare for the worst. Build like your life depends on it, because someday it will.